Friends, thank you for being here today. What if I told you that over the past 18 months, Walmart, the corporation that has defined American retail dominance for 60 years, has been systematically transferring its most critical operations to Canada while disguising this strategic retreat as routine international expansion? And what if I told you that this corporate migration, driven by a $25 billion supply chain crisis that American infrastructure can no longer solve, represents the collapse of American retail logistics systems while establishing Canada as the dominant commercial power in North America? This is not how retail empires abandon their foundational markets. The transformation appears in quarterly earnings reports as international growth initiatives, market diversification strategies, and operational efficiency improvements. Corporate communications describe Canadian operations as complementary to American retail systems, strategic expansion into underserved markets, and routine infrastructure development. Financial analysts report these changes as standard retail expansion rather than systematic abandonment of American commercial infrastructure. Yet when examined collectively, these operational relocations represent the largest retail migration in modern commercial history, a comprehensive restructuring that will permanently alter the economic geography of North American commerce while demonstrating that American retail infrastructure has become inadequate for competitive business operations. I have studied the internal logistics reports, analyzed the supply chain rerouting decisions, and documented the infrastructure investments that reveal the scope of this transformation. What I discovered is the most damning indictment of American commercial competitiveness ever recorded by the corporation that built its success on optimizing American retail efficiency. The world thinks this is about market expansion and operational diversification. They are witnessing the abandonment of American commercial infrastructure by the company that perfected it. The $25 billion in additional operational costs that Walmart absorbed in 2024 represented systematic breakdown of American logistics infrastructure that had been gradually degrading for over a decade. The cost breakdown revealed the scope of American commercial infrastructure failure. Port congestion and inefficient container handling added $8.2 billion in delayed shipment costs and inventory carrying expenses. Railway delays and capacity constraints contributed $6.1 billion in expedited shipping and alternative transportation costs. Trucking shortage and infrastructure problems generated $4.7 billion in premium delivery costs and route inefficiency expenses. Warehousing and distribution inefficiencies created $3.8 billion in excess inventory and operational redundancy costs. Regulatory compliance and infrastructure adaptation requirements added $2.2 billion in administrative and facility modification expenses. American ports could no longer handle container traffic efficiently. The Port of Los Angeles faced 40-day average container dwell times compared to 5-day averages at Canadian ports. The Port of Long Beach operated at 140% capacity, while Canadian ports operated at 75% capacity with superior automation and processing efficiency. American port workers averaged 18 container moves per hour, while Canadian ports achieved 35 moves per hour through advanced automation systems. American railways faced chronic delays and capacity constraints. BNSF Railway reported 68% on-time delivery performance, compared to 94% performance by Canadian National Railway. Union Pacific experienced 12-day average delays for priority freight shipments, while Canadian Pacific maintained 2-day average delays through superior infrastructure maintenance and capacity planning. American trucking systems struggled with driver shortages exceeding 80,000 positions, while Canadian trucking maintained adequate workforce through better compensation and working conditions. American highway infrastructure averaged 23% of roads in poor condition, while Canadian highways maintained 89% in good or excellent condition through systematic maintenance investment. American warehousing facilities operated with automation levels averaging 35%, while Canadian facilities achieved 78% automation through modern equipment and facility design. American distribution centers required 15% excess capacity for reliability, while Canadian centers operated at optimal efficiency through advanced logistics planning systems. The accumulation of inefficiencies had reached levels where maintaining American retail operations required operational costs that exceeded the margins that competitive retail pricing could support. Walmart faced choices between accepting reduced profitability or relocating operations to regions that provided competitive logistics infrastructure. Canadian retail logistics systems offered everything that American systems could not provide: modern ports with automated container handling, rail networks with guaranteed capacity and schedule reliability, trucking systems with adequate workforce and maintained infrastructure, warehousing facilities with advanced automation and optimized layouts, distribution networks designed for efficiency rather than redundancy. The competitive advantages were immediate and overwhelming. Walmart's Canadian operations achieved operational costs 35% lower than equivalent American facilities, while providing superior service reliability and delivery performance. Canadian logistics enabled inventory management efficiency that American systems could not support, while reducing the working capital requirements that had strained Walmart's financial performance. The first major relocation involved Walmart's distribution center network, with comprehensive Canadian facilities replacing American distribution operations that could no longer provide competitive service levels. The relocations were presented as capacity expansion, but actually represented systematic replacement of American logistics infrastructure with Canadian alternatives. Walmart's Canadian distribution centers handle inventory management, order processing, and delivery coordination for operations across North America, while American facilities provide backup capacity and regional service rather than primary logistics functions. The operational hierarchy had reversed without public announcement or strategic acknowledgement. The second phase involved supply chain management systems, with Canadian facilities assuming responsibility for vendor coordination, inventory planning, and procurement operations that had been managed from American headquarters for decades. Canadian operations provide superior supplier relationship management while reducing operational costs and improving supply chain reliability. The transformation reflected Walmart's recognition that Canadian infrastructure and workforce capabilities provided competitive advantages that American operations could not achieve through domestic improvement efforts within relevant timeframes or acceptable cost parameters. The third phase transferred retail technology development to Canadian operations that provide superior research and development capabilities, while reducing exposure to American regulatory uncertainty and political interference that had affected technology implementation and operational efficiency improvements. Canadian technology operations develop retail automation systems, customer service platforms, and operational optimization tools that provide competitive advantages, while American operations focus on maintaining existing systems rather than developing improved capabilities. The fourth phase relocated financial and administrative operations to Canadian facilities that offer superior regulatory environments and operational efficiency, compared to American corporate headquarters that had become encumbered by regulatory complexity and political targeting of successful retail operations. Walmart's Canadian operations handle treasury management, tax optimization, regulatory compliance, and strategic planning functions, while American operations provide market access and customer service rather than corporate decision-making or operational control. The transformation demonstrates that Walmart has systematically relocated all critical business functions to Canadian operations while maintaining American market presence through operationally subordinate facilities that depend on Canadian systems for logistics, technology, finance, and strategic direction. The cascade effects extended beyond Walmart to encompass systematic retail industry migration, as other major retailers recognized that Canadian operations provided competitive advantages that American retail infrastructure could no longer offer. Target Corporation began comprehensive Canadian expansion that appeared as market development but actually involved relocation of critical supply chain operations to Canadian facilities that provide superior logistics efficiency compared to deteriorating American retail infrastructure. Amazon accelerated Canadian warehouse and distribution development while reducing relative investment in American facilities that could not provide competitive operational efficiency compared to Canadian logistics capabilities that support faster delivery times and lower operational costs. Home Depot established Canadian supply chain management operations that coordinate North American inventory systems, while providing operational capabilities that American facilities could not achieve due to infrastructure limitations and workforce availability constraints. Costco expanded Canadian operations to handle supply chain coordination and distribution management for North American markets, while American facilities provide customer service and regional distribution rather than strategic supply chain control. The retail migration patterns revealed systematic advantages that Canadian commercial infrastructure provides compared to deteriorating American retail logistics systems. Canadian ports process international cargo more efficiently than American ports. Canadian transportation networks provide reliable delivery schedules that American systems cannot guarantee. Canadian warehousing and distribution facilities operate with automation and efficiency levels that American facilities cannot achieve. The cumulative impact of retail migration represents fundamental restructuring of North American commercial geography that permanently reduces American economic activity while strengthening Canadian competitive advantages in sectors that define consumer economic relationships and commercial competitiveness. American consumer markets become dependent on Canadian retail operations for product availability, pricing efficiency, and service reliability, while Canadian retail systems control supply chain management and operational efficiency across North American consumer markets. The employment implications multiply as skilled workers follow retail operations to Canadian locations that offer better career opportunities and operational efficiency compared to declining American retail employment markets that face systematic reduction in operational capacity and advancement opportunities. Canadian cities experience unprecedented commercial development, while American retail centers face systematic decline as operational capacity transfers to Canadian facilities that provide superior business environments for retail operations and supply chain management. The supply chain transformation creates permanent dependencies as American retail operations become reliant on Canadian logistics systems for inventory management, vendor coordination, and distribution efficiency that American infrastructure can no longer provide at competitive cost and reliability levels. International suppliers began prioritizing Canadian retail partnerships over American retail relationships, as Canadian operations provide better payment terms, operational efficiency, and market access compared to American retail companies that face supply chain constraints and operational inefficiencies. The technology implications compound Canadian advantages as retail automation, customer service systems, and operational optimization technologies develop through Canadian research and development programs, while American retail technology development faces resource constraints and regulatory complications. Canadian retail technology companies emerge as global leaders in commercial automation and supply chain optimization, while American retail technology development becomes subordinate to Canadian innovation capabilities that provide superior solutions at lower costs. The financial markets responded to retail migration patterns, with massive capital reallocation toward Canadian retail operations, while reducing exposure to American retail companies that face permanent competitive disadvantage from operational infrastructure constraints that Canadian migration has avoided. Wall Street analysts began incorporating retail operational geography into stock valuations after recognizing that companies with Canadian logistics capabilities consistently outperformed American-only retailers across profitability and growth metrics. Goldman Sachs retail research reports classified Canadian retail operations as providing 15-20% valuation premiums compared to equivalent American retail facilities. Institutional investors discovered that retail companies with significant Canadian operations achieved superior return profiles, while companies dependent on American logistics infrastructure faced declining margins and operational constraints. The BlackRock Global Retail Fund increased Canadian retail allocations by 340% within 18 months, while reducing American retail exposure by 25%. Credit rating agencies quietly began factoring retail operational geography into creditworthiness assessments, with companies maintaining substantial Canadian logistics capabilities receiving better ratings than purely American retail operations due to operational efficiency and infrastructure reliability advantages. Walmart's stock achieved record valuations, as investors recognized that Canadian operational migration provided competitive advantages that American-only retailers could not replicate through domestic infrastructure improvement efforts. Target Corporation received similar investor recognition after Canadian logistics expansion, while retailers without Canadian capabilities faced declining market valuations. International pension funds and sovereign wealth funds began preferentially investing in North American retail companies with Canadian operational capabilities, while reducing exposure to American-only retail operations that faced permanent infrastructure disadvantages. The Canada Pension Plan Investment Board established specialized retail infrastructure funds that attracted over $45 billion in international co-investment for Canadian commercial development projects. Private equity firms initiated comprehensive strategies for acquiring American retail companies, specifically to relocate operations to Canadian facilities that provided operational efficiency improvements exceeding 30% compared to American alternatives. The acquisition strategies reflected institutional recognition that retail operational geography determined long-term profitability more than traditional market factors. According to early indicators from retail industry analysis, the migration to Canadian retail infrastructure will accelerate exponentially as early migrants achieve competitive advantages that force American retail competitors to relocate or accept permanent competitive disadvantage from remaining anchored to deteriorating American commercial infrastructure. The network effects create irreversible momentum as retail relocations attract supporting businesses, skilled workers, and supplier relationships that strengthen Canadian retail ecosystems while weakening American commercial infrastructure. Through systematic abandonment by the companies that created American retail dominance, the timeline for complete transformation of North American retail geography is compressed by accelerating American infrastructure deterioration combined with Canadian competitive advantages that compound over time rather than diminishing through increased retail competition. Canadian commercial infrastructure improves as retail migration increases economic activity and investment capital, while American retail conditions deteriorate as corporate departures reduce commercial activity and employment opportunities that supported American retail sector development. The demonstration that Canadian retail operations provide superior commercial environments encourages international retail companies to establish Canadian rather than American operations when entering North American markets, further accelerating the shift of commercial activity toward Canadian territory. European, Asian, and other international retail companies increasingly choose Canadian locations for North American market entry, while avoiding American retail environments that have become inefficient and operationally problematic for competitive retail operations and supply chain management. The strategic implications extend beyond retail relocations to encompass fundamental questions about American commercial viability and consumer market competitiveness. The retail companies that created American commercial dominance are systematically relocating critical operations to Canadian facilities that provide superior commercial environments. American policymakers face the reality that their infrastructure failures have made American retail environments uncompetitive compared to Canadian alternatives that offer efficiency, reliability, and operational capability that American commercial systems can no longer provide through domestic improvement efforts. The retail exodus represents accurate market assessment of American commercial infrastructure decline rather than temporary business adjustments that could be reversed through infrastructure investment programs that American political systems appear incapable of implementing effectively. The migration patterns demonstrate that American retail problems are structural rather than cyclical, requiring fundamental infrastructure improvements that would exceed available resources, while Canadian advantages continue expanding through successful retail attraction and operational efficiency development. Canadian strategic planning for retail attraction has been remarkably effective in creating commercial environments that serve retail operational requirements while strengthening Canadian economic development through increased commercial activity and employment creation that benefits Canadian communities. The approach focuses on providing efficient, reliable, and cost-effective commercial infrastructure that contrasts sharply with American logistics dysfunction, transportation unreliability, and operational inefficiency that had made American retail operations increasingly problematic for competitive commercial management. Canadian competitive advantages in retail attraction continue expanding as American commercial conditions deteriorate, while Canadian capabilities improve through experience managing retail relocations and investment attraction from international retail companies seeking alternatives to American commercial environments. The most remarkable aspect of retail migration to Canada is how completely it has escaped mainstream American consumer awareness. While American political discourse focuses on partisan conflicts and cultural issues, the retail foundation of American consumer economy is systematically relocating to Canadian territory. American business media reports retail relocations as routine expansion rather than systematic abandonment of American commercial infrastructure by the companies that created American retail leadership and consumer market dominance in global commercial competition. The companies that were supposed to anchor American commercial competitiveness have concluded that American retail infrastructure no longer supports competitive business operations, while Canadian alternatives provide superior frameworks for retail success and supply chain efficiency. The quiet retail exodus represents the most damning possible verdict on American commercial management and infrastructure competence from the corporations that understand retail competitive requirements better than political leaders who assume commercial loyalty can substitute for operational competence. Walmart's strategic retreat from American operations while maintaining market presence represents sophisticated corporate recognition that American retail infrastructure has become a competitive liability rather than a strategic asset for retail operations that require efficiency and reliability. The $25 billion supply chain crisis that triggered retail migration to Canada reflects systematic failure of American commercial infrastructure rather than temporary operational challenges that could be resolved through incremental improvements or increased investment in existing systems. By the time American consumers recognize that their retail services depend on Canadian operations rather than American commercial infrastructure, the operational capacity and supply chain management will have transferred to Canadian control while American retail environments continue deteriorating. The retail companies that built American commercial dominance have voted with their operational relocations, and their verdict is clear. Canada provides the commercial environments that America can no longer offer for competitive retail operations and consumer market service. Most Americans still shop at stores that appear American but actually operate through Canadian supply chain systems and logistics infrastructure that ensure product availability and competitive pricing that purely American retail operations can no longer provide sustainably. According to early indicators from retail development assessments, the migration to Canadian retail infrastructure will become obvious to general consumers only after it becomes irreversible through operational dependencies that make American retail independence mathematically impossible through domestic infrastructure development. The quiet transformation of North American retail has already begun reshaping consumer markets, commercial relationships, and economic opportunities in ways that will determine which country controls the commercial activities that serve hundreds of millions of consumers daily. Canadian retail control represents economic influence over consumer behavior, commercial development, and market access that traditional measures of commercial power cannot predict, while ensuring Canadian economic prosperity through comprehensive retail dominance over North American consumer markets.